All right, getting all set up. I want to make sure my audio is coming in clear. Can you guys hear me all right? Anyone, I guess anyone who's listening? All right, perfect. Yeah, so I will get started in about a minute. And I think this panel runs for an hour, and I will see how much you get done. Hopefully, I'll be able to get as much of the panel squeezed in. I do know I talk a bit, and hopefully I'll have some time at the end for Q&A and discussion. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or save them till the end. If not, I've left my social media at the top of this chat, so you can follow me on the social media accounts there. And it looks like it is 8 p.m., so let's begin. Welcome, everybody, to the Inanimate Transformation panel. This is the panel that we're doing here for Megaplex Online. So hopefully you guys enjoy. Despite this this con not happening in person, feel free to check out the charity and check out the other vendors like myself. I have a special online store where I'll be selling stuff there. But this is a panel I've been doing for a few, I think for a few years now. Each time I do it, it slowly transforms, no pun intended, each time, because I slowly expand the panel as I get more feedback and more information on what people are interested in. And like I said, feel free to check out my social media. You could follow me at Twitter at TransformArtiv. You guys might also know me under my other alias, Inanimate, which fits for this panel. I also have a YouTube channel called TransformArtiv, where I actually have a video essay talking about one of the works that features inanimate transformation there. And so, yeah, you guys might know me online. I've been trying to help popularize the concept of inanimate transformation for a while now. It's something that I was interested in as a kid. I had no idea why. I grew up loving the Animorph books, and I loved books about shapeshifters. But for some reason, when I would role play shape-shifting scenarios in my mind, I always defaulted to items and different types of objects. No idea why I liked it, but it's something that fascinated me. There's really no term or trope, no term associated with inanimate transformation trope. I think, in the furry fandom, like calling it inanimate transformation. Recently, I think TV Tropes has made a page called Object Shapeshifting. This is a relatively new page. In fact, it was created after I released my video essay on the topic. So maybe they realized that there's enough information that deserves its own trope. But yeah, you've probably seen my art online a few times. It's something that I really do enjoy. And I see people in the chat are talking about having toon sonas and interested in toon. Yes, and that actually does play a role within inanimate transformation, as we are going to talk about the idea of body manipulation. So like I said, you guys might also know me at cons. I do a lot of transformation themed merch. You guys might recognize my Pleasure Island merchandise and my pull toy and plushie jerseys. These are finally back in stock, so check out my con store. I will be having it there as well. This is the first time I'm doing this. I'm offering special custom commissions for if you want your character flattened as a floor mat, a towel, or t-shirt. I'll be also offering this as well, so be sure to check that out. And my con store should be linked above. I'll also link it again at the end. And yes, I also have these transformation theme pins. You guys might recognize these pins from the Kickstarter project I did back then. These pins are also in stock, so be sure to check them out. All right, so let's get started. So I'm talking about inanimate transformation, and it's a very, very broad term. A lot of things fall under it. There's a lot of things people consider inanimate transformation, and there's a lot of things that technically are not inanimate transformation, but do fall under this specific category of what we want to talk about. And yes, I see the moderators in the chat. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so things we want to cover. So I'm not going to include anthropomorphic objects like cars and Brave Little Toaster, for example, since they were always objects to begin with. I'm specifically talking about humans or anthropomorphic characters who either transform or switch bodies with an object. So that will include reincarnation to a body and to an object body, body switching with a Another one, or human fuse with an object is another one as well. I also include Flat Stanley and works like flattening in this as well. Even though they're technically not being turned to objects, they're able to reform their bodies into different shapes that you could consider them object. And technically the purest form of inanimate transformation is someone who changes into an unconscious object, but they aren't able to experience this new form. So I'm excluding it from this because most people who do like inanimate transformation do like the idea of being able to experience their new form. All right, so let's kind of get started with just a brief history of transformation itself. So whether it's in the East or the West, in the Americas, the idea of transformation was always something that was seen as mystical and something that was the abilities of the gods. In fact, shapeshifting was considered a default ability of the gods, so they could come to Earth and disguise themselves to the humans that they're trying to influence. So you'll notice that a lot of ancient myth that the gods all around the world, they could transform to many different things. They could transform to different animals. They could transform into different elements. And of course, they could transform into different objects as well. So really, when we look at this, the idea of transformation into an object was just seen as a default ability. There was really no negative connotation. But as we kind of progress forward, a lot of our myths started taking place where the idea of turning to an object was seen as a curse. And of course, that would make sense because if transforming into an animal is a curse, obviously transforming to an object is one step further. This also includes immobilization, so a statue transformation, someone turning to stone. These were very, very common, especially within the Western world and the Near East. So stories like Medusa, King Midas, even in the Bible with Lot's wife turning to a pillar of salt, these were seen as punishment and normally seen as much worse than curses that involved animal transformation. Now, as we move forward in medieval culture, most cultures around the world, like I said, will then have the concept of a transformation duel. So normally it's two shapeshifters, two wizards, and two witches. Normally it's a master and apprentice dueling each other in various different forms. This is also connected with what's called a transformation chase. So within the transformation chase, normally it's an apprentice who's trying to escape a master, and the apprentice would keep on trying to change different forms to outrun the master, but the master will always take on more predatory forms while the apprentice will take on more prey forms. And normally in both the transformation chase and transformation duels, the person who ends up losing normally mistakenly or tries to think they could outsmart the person by transforming into an object. So normally they turn into like a cob of corn or a grain of wheat, some object that's very small and easy to hide, and the other shapeshifter would normally turn into like a chicken or a bird and just eat them in that form, and that would be the end of them. So normally it was seen transforming into an animate form was the dead end in these transformation duels and transformation chases. In fact, I think the only example where the guy who does the animate transformation outwits the other person in this case is from the author of the Magic School Bus series did a book called Dr. Change, and the apprentice of the shapeshifter would outwit his master by turning to different objects, because his master will assume he keep on turning into the so for example, his master thought he turned into a horse. In reality, he turned into the horse's saddle. So we see but in most cases, inanimate transformation is kind of seen as the dead end. I include Sword and Stone here because that's one of the best examples of the transformation duel in modern culture, even though there was no inanimate object. Well, technically, Merlin did turn into a bacteria. Most people would consider that inanimate. It could be borderline there. But as we kind of move forward, especially in the period known as Golden Age of Science Fiction in the 1920s, all the way to the 1960s and 70s, you'll notice, especially within the science fiction genre, in short stories, novellas, and television, the concept of inanimate transformation brought back. And this time, the inanimate transformation was used as a source of horror feel. So again, being transformed or being mobilized, most of these cases involve paralyzation. So transformation to statues or mannequins, or having the brain hooked up and stuck into a computer or virtual reality machine. In these cases, these were horror situations that most people really, really wanted to avoid. And in fact, this horror-fueled situation becomes really, really popular with reality-bending villains. So, of course, we had that classic Twilight Zone story where we have that kid who turned his father into a Jack-in-the-Box machine, and of course, all the way up to the modern day with Bill Cipher from Gravity Falls and Discord from My Little Pony. You see that the most horrific, chaotic punishments are being turned into inanimate bodies. All right. So around the same time in the 60s, specifically within the comic book industry, American comic book industry, you start seeing another source of power for people who do have inanimate transformation abilities, where they end up being used as gag characters. So you have Stoneboy from Legion of Superheroes, you have Zan from the Wonder Twins, and Plastic Man, who could form his body into any shape, including different objects. And these characters were seen as gag characters. So as opposed to the nightmare fuel situations we saw in the science fiction genre, we started seeing a move towards gag. The person who could turn to the object is the gag ability. And also when we continue moving forward, whenever there's one-off episodes that feature characters who could transform into objects, it's always the object transformation is always seen as the gag episode. Or if it's a character who could turn into objects, they're always seen as the gag character in the story. All right. And in the other hand, children's books, especially within kid fiction and young adult fiction, we started to see another take where a lot more unique ideas with transformation were explored outside of the horror fuel and gag situations, though they did involve a little bit elements of both. So, for example, of course, we're probably all aware of one of the most famous instances of inanimate transformation in a kid's book, Sylvester and the Magic Pebble, written by the guy who invented Shrek. This would lean towards horror fuel as well. The donkey kid ends up turning to a boulder and gets stuck in that form for almost an entire year while his family thinks he's deceased. So, but what's unique about this situation is we actually get some insight into his mindset. In most stories where someone's turned to stone an object, we actually don't really get insight into their mind. And that's kind of seen as a blessing because it would be a curse. Most people would consider a curse to be aware and conscious while stuck in some immobile form. But a lot of people who are fans of the concept of inanimate transformation do actually like this. And Sylvester and the Magic Pebble is a very, very good example of this. On the other hand, we have examples like Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley is a very popular character children's book. And for those of you in the crowd who love the aspect of tuning manipulation, where a toon character like from Looney Tunes is flattened but with a mallet and then rung up like a towel. We see examples of this in Flat Stanley. So he's not technically turned into an object, but he's able to manipulate his body into different objects. So he's able to mail himself through the post office. He's able to be used as a surfboard or snowboard, and he's also been able to use as a fan by his siblings. So not just kid stories, but also kid movies. This is a really rare piece that I found. It's a Canadian. It's a Canadian movie. I was talking to the director of this. I was trying to get him on a podcast, but he made a story about some kids who have the ability to travel in stamps. So they're able to enter a stamp and then ship themselves to the post office. The only problem is winds up in unique situations where he can't get off the stamp unless he's mailed and someone opens the letter. So for example, he was tossed out, crumpled up, and then one of the bullies actually ended up removing the stamp he was on from the envelope and ended up shipping him on another letter to China. But there's a lot of wacky situations that we see with inanimate transformation that most people won't find interesting, but fans of Inanimate Transformation like it because it offers a new level of storytelling. Specifically, and we're seeing this where the person who is transformed into an object is more vulnerable in these situations, and he is basically motion to the elements of what's happening around him. So he really has no control of the story. So somewhat related, but technically not an animate transformation, but I do include it here because it is related, are anthropomorphic objects like we see with Toy Story, Brave Little Toasters, and Cars. This is one about a anthropomorphic ornament, Christmas ornament, who's stored in the attic for a while, and he ends up breaking in one case. So these types of elements, while they're not humans being turned into objects, we do see these apply to stories involving humans later on. Which is why I do bring up examples like this, like Brave Little Toaster, for example, the book that was adapted into a movie. We get to see situations of these characters, and Toy Story around the same time, which kind of showcase how these different objects experience the world. Now, what's unique about these stories and what makes them different is that they are specifically objects that were made to be fulfilled to fulfill a purpose for humans. So they see the humans as kind of like their gods or their masters. That's why the characters in Brave Little Toaster and even the toys in Toy Story kind of see their owners as their masters. So that really changes the dynamic, which especially makes it more sad when they end up no longer fulfilling their use or end up being discarded. All right. And one of the, I think the best examples of this, which turns it on its head, is Sleeping Beauty. I mean, not Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast. I think Beauty and the Beast is probably one of the examples of animate transformation played straight. And what's different about the past examples of Toy Story and Brave Little Toaster are these are actually humans who were transformed into objects, but their role were servants to the beast. So, of course, they still see the beast as the master. But see, now that we know that these were formerly humans, having us refer to them as enchanted objects, as we do in the movies and how Disney refers to them as, is seen as kind of degrading, or at least putting them on a different level. So in these cases, we see the, again, transformation as opposed to transformation to an animal like a werewolf. With these inanimate transformation, there does seem to be a kind of hierarchy, a kind of class play into this. So the classism thing, it becomes really, really interesting as we continue forward. And I just want to point out the reason why it's kind of hard to do an animate transformation is, like I was saying, it's kind of horror feel. While it kind of works in animated and cartoony forms, when we try to do it in live action, like we did with the most recent Beauty and the Beast adaptation, it kind of does bring back the idea of horror feel. That's why the like I was saying, in the science fiction period, when they were experimenting with inanimate transformation, it was seen as horror feel. And of course, the same could be said with the example of Turbo Teen. This is why most inanimate transformation involves poofs or flattening or instant transformation, as opposed to slow body part by body part morphing like we do see with Animorphs, because it's kind of seen as horror feel. And this is because unlike transformation to animals, even transformation to animals can be kind of seen as somewhat disconcerting. Like if we look at the covers of the Animorph books, they do seem a bit disconcerting. But the difference is animals at least have anthropomorphic features. Animals can have body parts which could correspond to human body parts. Most objects do not have body parts which could correspond with human body parts. Even the car, which could kind of say, okay, maybe the headlights are the eyes and the grill is the teeth, it still kind of looks horrific. And Turbo Teen, I think, was one of the ones that at least tried to take a risk with it, where they actually made, as opposed to the previous examples we saw, where most of the characters who were transformed to objects or could transform to objects were secondary characters or gag characters. Turbo Teen was one of the few examples where we actually see him as the main star of the show. Unfortunately, it didn't do well, but it did spawn a lot of parodies of Turbo Teen as in pop culture down the line. And of course, we kids, and I think a lot of us millennials, if you guys are millennials in the 90s, would probably be aware of the commercials on TV around this time, specifically kid commercials for Capri Sun, Gushers, Fruit by the Foot, where we would have kids, well, not specifically always turn into objects. They would be put into situations where we could consider it a category of inanimate transformation. Specifically with the Go-Gurt and Capri Sun commercials, we see in the Go-Gurt commercials, they're flattened a lot. In the Capri Sun commercials, they're normally turn into objects as punishment. So there we go back with what we were talking about in the ancient days of the Greek myths, where inanimate transformation was seen as a punishment. We start seeing that again when we look at these kid commercials. Specifically, Disco, they actually, what's weird is they actually made a an animated series, like what happens. I think it was a web series. I don't think you could find these online anymore, but it was, they did a series of what following up with these kids after they were turned into these different objects. So we have that girl who transformed into sand. So she's now a girl who's made of sand. And her dilemma is cats want to use her as a litter box. So she's constantly being chased by cats. Yeah, so one of the cats actually end up catching up with her. And again, this is, as we see with inanimate transformation, while this could be seen as horror fuel, when it's in context of kid commercials and kid media, is normally played as very, very gaggy and more humorous, even though it could be seen as much darker if it was played straight as an adult story. And one thing that I see a lot with these kid commercials is, so we have a commercial for Capri Sun here, and we have a commercial for an Aladdin video game, and in both instances, one of the kids turns into a dog, but the other one turns into the fire hydrant. And we know like we said, we know the situation with what happens with fire hydrants and dogs. That's the gag again, the gag part of inanimate transformation, and it again also reinforces the hierarchy of transformation, where animal transformation is always seen as better than being turned into an object, especially when one's the fire hydrant and one's a dog. All right, so let's go back to those Go-Gurt commercials where it's flattening. So again, we could look back to Flat Stanley, where it's not exactly an animate transformation, but the body is more or less kind of immobile. And because of that, they're able to be easily manipulated and folded about. So this kid is saw that the other kid is flattened and ends up folding him into a book, using him as a bookmark and just leaving him there. So the kid now is stuck in the book and can't leave. So again, somewhat immobile and stuck in that position. And for some reason, this kid thinks it's cool. This kid gets a Go-Gurt tube and instantly becomes flat, and his friends are high-fiving behind him, and he seems psyched about it. So I guess some kids do like it. Like you're saying there, it's easy to take the person who's being flattened and manipulate them and fold them. And they could be used as if they were objects. So we have this person turn into a hero bowl in this example. So let's go back. Let's go across the pond to to Japan, where we have other instances of transformation. So while in America, transformation is kind of seen as gaggy and rarely played straight, in Japan, inanimate transformation has been played straight in examples like Soul Eater, and also in more adult situations like with some dating sims. So let's just start with some of the abilities. So we do see some gag characters being used. So this is from a Power Rangers TV show. This is one of the incarnations of their version of Power Rangers, or I guess they were technically the original Power Rangers. But we have the Pink Ranger who could turn into different objects. And if you notice, since she's a Pink Ranger, all the items that she could turn to, the mailbox, the radio, and the fan, have the pink colors on them. So a lot of artists who do draw transformation do incorporate these elements. So normally when someone is wearing, let's say, a blue shirt, that blue shirt is going to be incorporated into the item they turn into. So like I said, in Japan, it's a little bit more diverse with how they represent it. So on one hand, we have more adult situations. And the other hand, we have humans as representing these objects. So in this middle example, the human is not transformed into a piano, but we see the piano represented as a human. I think Hitalia is another example where their personification of literal countries. And of course, for some reason, this is a really, really big genre in Japan. It's reincarnation into objects. And we'll discuss about them later. But let's go first with the more adult situation. So of course, naturally, if someone could turn into objects like stuff like this, it's going to lead to more adult situations. So Japan, which has a different taboo on this, does seem to, especially panty transformation, as something that's used. Of course, the person turning to a panties normally are humiliated. In America, in the West, stuff that in Japan might be used in more adult situations and more adult stories are still seen as gaggy. So, for example, here's I think a Canadian kids show where one of the superheroes is a girl who could turn into different objects, and again, she has the pink color reinforced in her new form. She turned into a roll of toilet paper, and she ends up being stuck in a toilet in one case. And of course, Timmy Turner from Fairly Odd Parents was called a potty mouth and got turned to a toilet. So again, situations which we would see in other cases as bad within kids media is kind of seen as a fun gag, to the point where I actually found this recently. The British government, their National Health Service, sponsored an entire series of web shows and games to help get kids to wash their hands, and the entire series is formed based on the concept of a team of 7 kids who could turn into different items that you normally find in the bathroom. So this girl could turn to different types of paper towels, and this kid could turn to different types of soap. So again, for some reason, the animate transformation seems to go hand in hand with promoting to kids for some reason, which probably explains why a lot of people who grew up during this period seem to have a fascination with animate transformation today. Either they're completely horrified by it, or they're fascinated by it for some reason. It was ingrained with us. All right. So let's go back to the West, to the East. So this is from actually a Chinese animated series, but again, we do have transformation being seen as a gag. So in this case, this Chinese show actually takes the trope different than how Japanese anime and manga would do it, where normally transformation into unmentionables is seen as kind of not safe for work. This character is actually using it to spy on this creep right here. So instead of girls picking him up, it's a creep guy that he's trying to call out. And of course, in this example, he turned into a cardboard box and instantly gets stomped on by a grandmother. So again, reinforcing an animate transformation as the gag ability. All right, so let's go back to that weird idea that for some reason in Japan, the concept of reincarnation into an object seems to be a really big thing. So this I think this is a light novel series. I actually haven't really looked into it. I did find the covers though, and it's about a guy who after he died reincarnated into a vending machine, and you could tell that this guy is a sentient vending machine because he has eyes on him, and for some reason he's carried around by this girl. The other example that I mentioned earlier is the guy who was reincarnated into a sword. So this guy was reincarnated into a sword and is used as a weapon by this girl in this mystical world. And even though she is the wielder of the weapon, she treats him as the master, and he's the guy who's kind of in charge and trying to teach her how to use him as a sword. And this leads up, of course, to one of the best examples of this is Soul Eater, where as opposed to the previous cases, the dynamic is equal in this case. So normally the person, especially within Western media, when the person is transformed into an object, like we were saying with Beauty and the Beast, they're seen as subservient and lower to the person who is not inanimate or the user. And in the case of Soul Eater, it specifically mentioned that the person who transforms into the weapon and the weapon wielder are on equal standing, and that the person who transforms into the weapon should not be treated as if they were an object. Now, of course, this leads to one of the most recent examples, which I'm really, really surprised exists, is Gipulair, where the main protagonist is able to transform into a fursuit or a mascot suit. Basically, it's just a fursuit. And like with the previous examples with Soul Eater and the reincarnation into a sword, it's always the same examples. It's always a cute girl using the guy who could transform into an object as the weapon. In this case, she could use the fursuit he transforms into as a superpowered suit, and they team up and stop evildoers. In this case, where I guess he is a little bit more self-conscious about his abilities, and she's a little bit more hard-edged, so she's able to use his body better than he is ever able to. But it's interesting. It's interesting examples where it's always the male protagonist being turned into the object being wielded by the female character. And of course, yeah, so Gippulir was just recently adapted into an anime series this year. And if you guys are interested, I actually made a video essay talking about the transformation tropes in the first episode of Gippulir. So if you guys are interested, I'm going to link it below right here. And you guys could check that out after I'm done with this panel to kind of get a follow-up on tropes that I saw specific with Gippulir that tied in with the topics I'm talking about here. All right, so let's continue more of Japan. So one of the other famous examples of live action transformation is a short from the film Tokyo, where we see the girl transform into a chair. Most people don't actually know, but that was actually based off an American graphic novel where we have a girl who also transforms into a chair. And we start seeing this more and more where an animate transformation in the comic scene and the graphic novel scene, if it's more adult, as opposed to being horror feel, it's more existentialist. So it's about a person trying to find out where they belong or if they belong. So an animate transformation now has more existentialist meaning in adult literature. As opposed to, like I said, even though it's seen as a gag ability for kids, some people are trying to play it more straight. So we have the series Teen Bolt, which is kind of like a riff on Turbo Teen that we saw earlier, and it's about a main protagonist with a superpower who could turn into a bolt. And around the same time, we see a lot of webcomics. So I'm specifically non-furry, non-TF webcomics that also experiment with different types of transformation, where it's seen as gaggy, like we have with Shifter on the left, or seen as kind of existentialist, like we do with this lamp one on the right. And so this is seen mirrored in literature as well, where when we have adult novels that feature an animate transformation, like the particular Salads of Lemon Cake, it's always seen as existentialist. So in this story, the brother of the protagonist can turn into a chair, and he likes turning to a chair a lot because it's a way for him to escape the world. And for some reason, I'm noticing that every time it's a transformation where someone turns into a chair, it's always about existentialism. On the other hand, we have Upside Down Magic, which I think was just recently adapted into a live-action film by Disney, where one of the secondary protagonists turns into a boulder, and he's kind of useless when he turns into a boulder. And unfortunately, I don't think they adapted his, even though he's one of the main characters in the book series, I don't think he makes an appearance in the Disney version. But we do see, like I said, a divide. Animate transformation seems to only exist as existential metaphors in adult fiction, and again, as gag or background characters in children's fiction. All right, but again, like we're saying, that some of it is improving. So the creators of Miraculous Ladybug, they made a new series called Power Players, where the main protagonist can turn into a toy and join his other toys on adventures. Well, it's implied he's turned into a toy because a lot of people would say that he technically just shrunk down and has toy armor on him. But when we look at if you could pause the transformation sequences, he has body parts in the pegs and different areas that could only exist if he was a toy. So yeah, toy. I say this is technically a toy transformation, and so we get to the point where now transformation is kind of mainstream. So specifically an animate transformation, which used to, like years ago when I started drawing an animate transformation, was always seen as weird and something that people would try to avoid and not look at, it's now kind of hit the mainstream. Especially we have Pickle Rick from Rick and Morty essentially making a meme out of an animate transformation. So one of the biggest memes of the last few years is based around an animate transformation. And something that I thought would never see a Gippulir, where it involves fursuit transformation. So you're taking like two taboos, furries and an animate transformation, and combining into one. And it's now a mainstream anime that everyone's enjoying. So transformation has really become mainstream at this point. And I want to now go into how, and I did this as a little meme just for fun. So now we kind of got a history of how transformation occurred in fiction. Let's shift over to how the furry fandom actually is producing this within their artwork. Actually, let me take a little drink. All right. So let's get to the first thing that most of us in the fandom, how were introduced to Inanimate transformation. Oh, thanks. So most of us know Inanimate transformation through pool toy or plushie transformation. So my friend Aaron right here is known for his pool toy drawings. Technically, he doesn't draw transformation. He draws characters who are pool toys, but it does have overlap. So in most cases, a lot of us got introduced to seeing cute characters who were pool toys or plushies. And of course, this naturally leads into transformation involving these characters. In the most part, because we like to identify things like plushies and pool toys as essentially very, very cute. Pool toys and plushies are both meant to be hugged. So we identify these as humans as cute things. So when you have a character who is able to turn into a pool toy or a plushie, something that's supposed to be nice and huggable, we instantly identify this as cute. So we start seeing this a lot in specifically within the furry fandom because like I was saying, Inanimate transformation evolves differently in different fandoms. So we do have horror fans, we do have fans of witches, we do have fans of dominatrix, and fans of other areas. But within the furry side of the transformation fandom, you see a lot of it based around these pool toys and plushies. Now, one thing we're going to notice is when we have characters who transform into these forms, they normally have this big wide grin and the blush mark. Now, this is because pool toys, in the case of pool toys and plushies, they normally are always sewn or created with big wide grins, and that's cute. But the funny thing is, most people, when they get transformed into a pool toy or a plushie, they're nervous or worried or embarrassed about the transformation, but they can't really express it. So it's a funny contrast. We identify as a funny contrast when they are blushing and nervous and worried, but yet they have giant grins on their face, like this. And this is actually where the Japanese side of media comes into play, because blush, the way we do blush is something that's very, very common in Japanese manga and anime. And since a character cannot, when they're transformed into an animate state, they can't really change the facial expression that much. So to show emotions like embarrassment, we have to add blush on top of this permanent look that they have on their face. And to show nervousness, we normally add sweat drops. This is another trope that comes from Japanese anime and manga. And I think someone kind of pointed out in one of my early versions of this panel is that a lot of pool toys specifically are drawn what's now called the cow arts grin. Even though pool toy transformation drawn like this predated the cow art style, especially in the early 2000s. We now can kind of identify this as a cow art grin, but this is how we normally used to draw them. In fact, a lot of these things that we use to identify a living a person or a creature who was transformed into a pool toy or plushie, we now have applied across the board to different objects. So it's come to the point where even if the person transforms into something simple as boots or a chair, if we add blush on the chair, if we add sweat drops on the boots, those of us within the transformation community instantly know that that pair of boots or that chair is a transformed person, because we are able to apply these markers of expressions onto these objects. And this is why I like to bring up Gipular. I think it's very, very interesting because I think the person who made Gipular has to be a fan of this type of transformation, though, or a fan of transformation within the furry community or transformation community. Because even though the sweat drops and the blush is something that we see commonly with Japanese anime and manga, the fact that it's the sweat drops and blush on top of a worried, nervous-looking face with a big grin, that's something that really, really was popular, and I really think got started and was popularized within the furry side of the transformation community. So I really think that the creator of this manga had to have been a fan of the furry side of things. All right, let's go to the next one. So flattening. Flattening is a fun thing that those of you who are like Toon folks in the audience are talking about, like we're saying with the flat Stanley thing. So someone who is flattened normally becomes a wobbly noodle. We could describe it as like a towel. Sometimes it could be folded up. Sometimes it could be used as cardboard standees. And specifically with people who are flattened and basically become limp noodles, this leads into the next thing, clothing transformation specifically, where with clothing transformation, the person is transformed into something that is worn. Now, in the case of most clothing transformation, let's get here. In specifically within the fandom, so it takes different types of aspects. Normally, the person who is transformed to clothing is represented with eyes on the shirt that they turned into, and it could be seen as kind of cute. So I'm also showing some of my art here. I think there's a very interesting development there. So while people can see this as kind of strange for an outsider, I think there's logical explanations for why people do enjoy clothing transformation. In most cases, people, the subject matters who are normally the ones transformed to clothing are people who are kind of introverted or people who don't really like human contact or don't like forced contact. So turning them into something that needs to be worn forces that contact on top of them. It could be seen as a way to like hug a friend. So, like for example, turning to a shirt and being worn could be seen as a metaphor for hugging a friend, for embracing a friend, and in most cases, it's seen as very, very cute and very, very safe. And it could lead to interesting situations. Now, here's a comic I drew to show an example of this. It could be used a different way. So, like we saw with Flat Stanley, he could fold himself up and mail himself through the mail. There are situations where a character can maybe transform to clothing and hide themselves in the luggage bag and get transported around. Of course, if they're caught by their friend, it adds to a little bit of an embarrassing situation for them. Of course, that would naturally cross over with why clothing transformation naturally leads into fursuit transformation, considering most of the people who are drawing this stuff are also active members of the furry community. Being members of the furry community, fursuits are obviously the big thing. So like we saw with Gipulier, fursuit transformation is kind of a natural conclusion of this stuff. So specifically with a fursuit transformation, it's kind of seen as nice and cute. In most cases, for majority of the cases, the person transformed to a fursuit is kind of helpless after they get transformed, and they basically flop on the ground helpless. And they normally need a friend to help pick them up and give them support and wear them. So it's kind of seen as cute. In other cases, the fursuit acts as kind of like a parasite or an extra skin suit, where the person who puts them on, unaware that they are living, ends up getting taken over by the fursuit that they are wearing. So the person who is a living fursuit is able to use them as basically like a muscle puppet inside them. So that's the differences. So for fursuit transformation, it's either the person is transformed to a fursuit and is helpless and is reliant on the friend to help move them or give them form by wearing them. But the other side of the thing is the fursuit can also act as kind of like a parasitic creature and absorb and use the person who's wearing them as, like I said, the muscle puppet. And we see this also branch off into latex transformation and slime transformation suits. And people would normally think, oh, that is weird. But then we realize, wait, Venom is essentially this. So one of the most mainstream villains out there with who had his own movie is essentially a living slime suit that could control other people. All right, so this goes into the next type of transformation that is very, very common within these fandoms. It is transformation to non-natural objects, specifically furniture and small household items. So this goes back to the Beauty and the Beast situation where the people who get transform to these different types of objects. And as we could see, this also introduces another element for how people display expressions. So this is art I did with for a friend of mine, where I get transformed to a chair right here, and I represent myself as a chair with a bubble with my human face on it. And you see this a lot with transformation into objects, because as opposed to transformation into a pool toy or a stuffed animal, or fursuit, where they still kind of look like a living creature and you could identify expressions onto these faces. Things like chairs and fans and apples do not have any anthropomorphic facial features. So normally to represent emotions and expressions, you represent the character who got transformed with a thought or bubble on the side, and they're able to make up whatever expressions they like. All right, so this kind of leads into ideas of why this seems to appeal to certain types of people. I know for some people, inanimate transformation is seen as a nightmare fuel. It's seen as cringe. It's seen as just a dumb gag. But there seems to be some fascination, considering every time I do this panel at a lot of cons, it's always a full room, and we see this, especially in the last few years, this rise of an animate transformation on deviant art and fur affinity. So I studied human psychology at Johns Hopkins University, and I tried to see if I could apply some psychology to this. The issue is there is not much research done into this type of transformation. For the most part, the closest that we have to researching an animate transformation would be in the subcategory of domination, where an animate transformation, the closest thing that we have is called, I think, phornophilia, where humans like being tied up and used as furniture. And it's seen as, a kind of sexual domination with dominatrix. And I don't think and that's the furthest modern psychology has taken into that form. And I don't think that's completely accurate, because a lot of people who are fans of animate transformation, I notice, are always draw cutesy, safe for work, and a lot of the times they're asexual. So, for example, I'm asexual, and I find fascination in animate transformation, not in the way psychology describes it, but for other reasons. So I try to explore why someone like myself and my friends do enjoy it. So let's talk about the first term, justification. This is a really, really charged term, but I think it's the best way to explain how what's going on with the situations. Within the transformation fandom, there are people who are specifically fans of the step-by-step transformation, slowly morphing from one body to the other, like American Werewolf. For most people who are fans of specifically inanimate transformation, this is where animal transformation and animate transformation differ. While people who like transformation to animals like the slow step-by-step shift of their body turning to an animal form, most people who like an animate transformation normally like what happens afterwards. Like, okay, now this person got turned into an object. What's going to happen to them at the end? And this is where we have two types of situations that are very, very common in animate transformation art and stories. So first, if the person is transformed into an object and no one knows that they are the object, it could lead to different types of situations. So first, it could lead to a fly in the wall situation where the person is able to be in the room and the person doesn't know that their friends don't know that they are transformed to objects. So that means they could listen on to their conversation. They could spy on them. And in fact, like we're seeing with like I was saying with the Japanese dating sims, where the person can transform to objects, is normally just to spy on girls. But in most cases, it doesn't lead to devious spying, it's normally accidental spying. But the next situation comes up is called it's where it falls into an awkward situation. So if someone, for example, transforms into a vacuum cleaner and they're trying to hide and make themselves out of the way so no one sees them, but if a friend comes in and uses them as a vacuum cleaner, okay, that leads to a awkward situation where the friend doesn't know that the vacuum he's using is also his friend, but the person who transformed into a vacuum knows that he's the vacuum and he knows he's being used as a vacuum. So in this case, where they're unknowingly transformed, they experience being used as an object without semblance to their human form. So it's kind of like the opposite situation of Beauty and the Beast, where they are kind of forced into these roles of servitude for the person that's using them. In the other case, we have knowing transformation. This normally, this outside the furry fandom, this is very, very common with fans of people who like shape-shifting spells with witches, or in the fantasy fandoms, where it's normally a witch who puts a curse on the person and they transform into the object. And in this case, it's seen as kind of a form of embarrassment because, like we were saying, a lot of people who transform into the object are sometimes more antisocial people who don't want human contact or human communication. So they are knowingly transformed to an object, and everyone knows it could lead to some embarrassment because now they're center of attention. Because like, oh, look, someone could say, oh, where's Fred? Oh, I turned Fred into the table that's in the living room now. And the other person say, oh, Fred, you're a table now. So of course, Fred as a table cannot get out of the room and he's stuck in that situation. So it kind of leads to some embarrassing situations. And for the most part, this is more cutesy and fun. We see this with a lot of fan art and fan fiction in these situations where it's playful. It's there's nothing devious to it, even though someone could make more nightmare-fueled stories where it does become more horror-like in that angle. All right. So the next thing we could look at is where it falls into escapism. This is why I think This is why I think a lot of adult fiction and graphic novels that use inanimate transformation use it to represent existentialism, is because it does kind of see that. If we look at some of the earliest inanimate transformation in fiction, it normally comes in the case of it being a curse, like we're talking about, like with Medusa turning people to stone, with King Midas turning people to gold, with God Yahweh turning people into pillars of salt. It's seen as an alternative to death. So as opposed to a bloody death where there's blood on the hands of the person who's killing them, it's seen as kind of like a benign death. So it could wind up in one of two cases. When the person is, for example, transformed to a statue, like with this case with this art on the left, the person who's transformed to a statue, if they're conscious and aware of themselves, then it's seen as kind of grim because they're consciously thinking and they're stuck in that form. They don't know what they're going to take back. If they're unconscious, then it's kind of seen as a break. So it's kind of seen as like just putting life on hold, because life is kind of hard. We humans have hectic, long lives, and sometimes we just want to put everything on pause, stop worrying about bills, stop worrying about life, stop worrying about politics. And turning to an object is kind of seen as a nice way to kind of take a little time off and just put a pause on things. The other thing is knowing your place in the world. So we as humans, like we said, we're kind of we are beings that we don't know. Sometimes we don't know our purpose. We go out throughout life not knowing what we want to do with our lives. And in a lot of stories where people turn to an object, this is not the case, because when you're turned to an object, you know exactly what your purpose in life is. So for example, if someone was transformed into a broom, he now no longer has fears about going to college, getting a job, and trying to be a doctor, because a broom is made for one purpose. A broom is made to clean things up. A car is made to drive people from place to place. So this is seen as a nice alternative, because while we humans with free will could be anything we want, by basically forcing object transformation on the person, it forces them into a specific role that they are made for, because objects are made for specific roles. So it gives them a relief of simple existence, because they know exactly what their purpose is now that they're in the object form. And I think, well, yeah, with that, so that concludes the presentation portion of the panel. If you guys are interested in me exploring this topic in more detail, like I said, I have the Gipular review that I've done, which you guys could see here. And with that, I think we have some time left, so I could take questions. So if you guys have any questions, anything that I've covered that you are interested in me going more in depth on, or any questions you want me to answer, feel free to type them into the chat, and I'll answer them until our time is up. If not, you guys could follow me. Like I said, you can follow me on Twitter at Transformative. My YouTube channel is Transformative Art, and I have a my con store up where I am offering a lot of transformation specific goodies. A lot of the stuff have been out of stock for a few months, and I'm making them available right now for you guys are some of the first people who get to actually see a lot of these new products. So if you guys are interested, be sure to check that out. And with that, thank you for joining me for my panel for Megaplex Online. I hope you guys are having a good time. If you guys have any questions, yeah, feel free to let me know. Oh, thank you very much. Oh yeah, I recognize a lot of faces and names in the chat here. A lot of you guys are I recognize you specifically from the transformation art you guys draw as well. And actually, just curious, what are some of your guys' favorite transformations? Like, do you guys have any specific within the inanimate transformation side of things? Do you guys have any specific inanimate transformation that you like? All right, Tuni asked me a question. What got you into inanimate TF? Mine is from old cartoons. Okay, well, like I was saying, I was interested in shapeshifting as a kid, specifically reading Animorph books. But for some reason, when I was like about to go to sleep and I was role playing myself as an Animorph, for some reason I was more fascinated in the concept of, oh, I could transform into an object. So instead of turning into an animal, my mind would role play the situation. Oh, what would happen if I turned into a t-shirt or a CD player or a computer, stuff like that. And for some reason, that just really, really appealed to me. And I think that's really what got me into an anime transformation to begin with. I didn't know why I was interested in this. I just thought, hey, it'll be fun to be a computer for a day or a chair for the day. Yeah, so you're mentioning something like flattening and stretching, and then I think that partially links into what I like about transformation. So, for example, I know with the case of like towel transformations could lead to more not safe for work situations. For me, I try to avoid not safe for work stuff when I talk about an animate transformation or when I draw it. Um, but I do like stuff like that. So if someone turns into a towel and that person is now being used and stretched and pulled, there's something interesting about that. Or being folded up flat and put into the dresser. There's something interesting about that. I think it would be a weird feeling to be folded flat and stretched. And so just curious, how many of you guys have actually seen the new Gipler anime yet? I actually haven't really watched through it completely. I only saw the first episode. I was just really surprised how they were able to do fursuit transformation and make it mainstream. I really thought I would never see the day where fursuit transformation would be like and not even as a background character, but as a full mainstream character. I never thought I'll see the day where that would happen. Yeah, the idea of so I like I said that's art that I've drawn in the past where I've thought fursuit transformation I liked it. So this is so long before I even knew a Ghibli. Let's see. I drew this one where I had a person who was hired at Disney and transformed into a Nick Wilde fursuit. And again, it's fascinating. Again, I think the problems with transformation, especially like this, is it could lead to not safe for work situations, implied not safe for work situations. And I think most people want to avoid that. I personally like keeping it clean. And I think Ghibli is one that's kind of stretching the line, but I'm surprised they were able to make it work. And they do have a fan base because I do post my fan art on the subreddit, and it does get a lot of notice. So there we go. Oh, okay. You said you saw a manga that was similar. What manga are you talking about? Do they have a description of that manga? Because that sounds pretty interesting. Yeah, I think what's interesting is a lot of the more experimental inanimate transformation stories I've seen, like I was saying, is either in Japan, it comes from Japan, and but again, from Japan, it does seem to fall on the more not safe for work implications, or it comes from kids' stories in the West. And again, with the kids' story, it's a little bit more gaggy with their situations. So it's sad that there's not as much mainstream work that features it. I think Rick and Morty did bring it kind of to the mainstream with Pickle Rick, but again that it always falls back, like I said, to one or two categories. It either becomes Nightmare Fuel or a gag, so it's very hard to avoid it. Okay, so you said that there is a manga where there's two brothers and one of them becomes a fur power suit. That sounds interesting. Yeah, I would like to know if you could link that title here. I would like to add that to my panel because that sounds interesting. Okay, Tune, you said I remember an Indonesian friend talk about myth of a boy who transformed into a boat. My friend does anime transformation as well. Oh, that sounds interesting. Who's your friend, by the way? The boat transformation sounds interesting. Of course, we do have the teen boat story. I'm hoping to try to make my own transformation stories later on. I do want to make some mainstream comics, and I think with Gipular coming out, it has added to the risk. Oh yeah, Elastic. I know him. All right. I think I have to wrap up. But if you guys want to continue to chat with me, you can message me on Telegram. I think we could still use this room while it's open. If not, you could check out my Telegram. It is Choco Pony. Just simply Choco Pony. Just feel free to message me there. With that, thanks a lot for coming. I hope you guys have a good rest of your time here at this con. And I'm probably just going to need to head to bed soon. But you guys take care.